I started my dream boutique in Los Angeles and invited my whole family, and they didn't show up. My name is Amelia Porter. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally broke my heart on what should have been the happiest day of my life. Picture this. You've just opened your dream business. You've put everything on the line, and you're standing alone in an empty room waiting for the people who matter most. The silence was deafening, and the absence was even louder. If you've ever felt abandoned by the people you trusted most, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because you're not alone in this feeling, and I want to share this journey with people who understand that pain. There I was, standing in my beautiful new boutique on Melrose Avenue, wearing my best dress, with champagne chilling and hors d'oeuvres perfectly arranged on silver platters. The grand opening was supposed to start at 6 p.m., and I had sent invitations to my parents, my two sisters Sarah and Jessica, my brother Marcus, and even my extended family. I had dreamed of this moment for years, seeing their proud faces as they walked through the doors of Porter's Paradise, the boutique I had built from scratch. The fairy lights were twinkling, the clothes were perfectly displayed, and everything looked like something out of a magazine. But as 6:15 turned into 6:30 and then 6:45, the reality started sinking in like a cold knife to my chest. The rejection wasn't just about them not showing up. It was about what their absence represented. For months leading up to this day, I had shared my excitement, my fears, my sleepless nights planning every detail of this boutique with them. I had sent them photos of the renovation process, asked for their opinions on the color scheme, and even named one of the clothing lines after my grandmother who had passed away. Yet when I needed them most, when I wanted to share my proudest achievement, they chose to be anywhere else but there. My phone buzzed with a group text from my sister Sarah. "Sorry, can't make it tonight. Something came up with the kids." That was it. No explanation, no rain check, no acknowledgement of what this meant to me. The worst part wasn't the empty boutique or the untouched food. It was the realization that I had been living in a fantasy where my family actually cared about my dreams. I had spent years seeking their approval, changing my plans to accommodate their opinions, and convincing myself that their love was just expressed differently. But standing there alone, surrounded by everything I had worked so hard to create, I finally understood that some people will never see your worth, no matter how much you achieve. The boutique was gorgeous, the business plan was solid, and I had every reason to be proud. Yet their absence made me question everything. Have you ever worked so hard for something, only to realize the people you wanted to impress the most didn't even care enough to witness your success? As I locked the doors that night and turned off the fairy lights, I made a decision that would change everything. I realized that this moment of rejection, as painful as it was actually a gift. It was showing me exactly where I stood in their priorities. The tears I cried that night weren't just tears of sadness, they were tears of awakening. I was done seeking validation from people who had never truly seen me, and I was ready to build a life where my success didn't depend on their approval. But what I discovered next would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and what it really means to stand on your own. You won't believe what happened when I decided to stop caring about their opinion and started focusing on the people who actually showed up for me. The morning after my family's no-show, I woke up with puffy eyes and a heart that felt like it had been put through a blender, but something had shifted during those hours of crying. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, and that anger was starting to fuel something powerful inside me. I made coffee, sat in my tiny apartment overlooking the city, and stared at the business cards scattered on my kitchen table, each one representing someone who had believed in my vision when my own family couldn't be bothered to care. The pain of their rejection was real, but I was beginning to understand that their absence said more about them than it did about me. This wasn't just about a missed grand opening. This was about years of conditional love, backhanded compliments, and subtle sabotage disguised as concern. Let me paint you a picture of what growing up in the Porter family was really like. My parents, David and Linda Porter, were the kind of people who believed that dreams were luxuries you couldn't afford if you were realistic about life. Every time I mentioned wanting to study fashion design, my mom would sigh and say, "Amelia, honey, that's not a real career. You need something stable." When I got my degree and started working retail to learn the business from the ground up, my dad would introduce me to his friends as our daughter who's still figuring things out. My sisters had chosen the safe paths. Sarah became a nurse, Jessica went into accounting, and they were always held up as the examples I should follow. Even my brother Marcus, who worked construction, was praised for being practical, while my dreams were dismissed as phase I'd eventually grow out of. The subtle undermining had been going on for years, but I had been too hopeful to see it clearly. When I first told them about my plan to open a boutique, my mom's first question wasn't, "How can we help?" or, "We're so proud of you." It was, "Are you sure you have enough money for this? What if it fails?" My dad's response was even worse. He just chuckled and said, "Well, I guess everyone needs to learn their lessons the hard way." Sarah had rolled her eyes and muttered something about millennial entitlement, while Jessica had immediately started lecturing me about business failure statistics. Even when I showed them my detailed business plan, my market research, and my savings account, they responded with skepticism disguised as concern. They had been conditioning me to expect their doubt, and I had been so desperate for their approval that I kept trying to prove myself worthy of their belief. But here's the thing about rejection from family. It cuts deeper than any other kind because these are supposed to be your people, your safe harbor, your biggest cheerleaders. When strangers doubt you, you can dismiss it. But when your own blood questions your worth, it plants seeds of self-doubt that can grow like weeds in your mind. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their respect, changing my plans when they disapproved, seeking their advice even when I knew they didn't understand my industry, and celebrating my small victories quietly because I was tired of their lukewarm responses. The grand opening was supposed to be my moment to finally prove that their little dreamer daughter had been right all along, that I was capable of building something beautiful and successful. Instead, their absence proved that no amount of success would ever be enough to change how they saw me. That's when I realized I was fighting the wrong battle. I had been trying to win a war for their approval instead of building a life that made me genuinely happy. The boutique wasn't just a business. It was my declaration of independence from their limited vision of what my life should look like. Standing in that empty room the night before had been painful, but it had also been liberating in a way I couldn't have imagined. I was finally free to succeed or fail on my own terms, without the weight of their expectations or the fear of their judgment holding me back. But little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would teach me the real difference between the family you're born with and the family you choose. What happened next would show me that sometimes the most devastating rejections lead to the most beautiful discoveries about who you really are and what you're truly capable of achieving. The dream of opening Porter's Paradise didn't just appear overnight. It had been growing inside me since I was 12 years old, watching my grandmother Helen alter clothes in her tiny sewing room. She had this magical way of taking something ordinary and transforming it into something that made the person wearing it feel like they could conquer the world. I would sit on her old wooden stool for hours, mesmerized by the way her fingers moved across fabric, how she could see potential where others saw flaws. When she passed away when I was 16, she left me her vintage Singer sewing machine and a journal filled with sketches of designs she never got to create. That's when I knew that fashion wasn't just something I liked. It was something that flowed through my veins like a calling I couldn't ignore. College was where the dream started taking real shape. Even though my parents kept pushing me toward practical majors like business administration or communications, I secretly took fashion design courses, paying for them with money from my part-time job at a local coffee shop, and spent my nights sketching designs and learning about fabric construction. My roommate Emma thought I was crazy for staying up until 3 a.m. working on mood boards and studying fashion history, but she also saw the fire in my eyes when I talked about creating a space where women could find clothes that made them feel confident and beautiful. I wasn't just dreaming about selling clothes. I was dreaming about creating experiences, about helping women discover their own style and feel amazing in their own skin. The vision was crystal clear. A boutique that felt like stepping into a best friend's closet where every piece was carefully curated to make the customer feel special. After graduation, I threw myself into learning the business from every angle possible, even when it meant taking jobs that my family considered beneath my college degree. I worked at 3 different retail stores, from high-end department stores to small independent boutiques, absorbing everything like a sponge. How to read customer preferences, how to manage inventory, how to create displays that told a story. I saved every penny I could, living on ramen noodles and generic brand everything, while secretly building a business plan that I refined obsessively. My apartment was covered with magazine clippings, fabric samples, and spreadsheets detailing everything from startup costs to projected revenue for the first 3 years. I researched locations, studied foot traffic patterns, and even learned basic accounting because I knew that passion without practical skills was just wishful thinking. The breakthrough moment came when I found the perfect location on Melrose Avenue, a small space with huge windows and exposed brick walls that practically screamed, "Transform me into something beautiful." The rent was steep, but the foot traffic was incredible, and I could already envision how the natural light would make the clothes glow like pieces of art. I had $30,000 saved up, which sounds like a lot until you realize how quickly it disappears when you're buying fixtures, inventory, insurance, permits, and all the other expenses that come with starting a business. I spent 3 months renovating that space myself, learning how to install lighting, paint walls, and arrange furniture from YouTube videos because I couldn't afford to hire professionals. Every blister on my hands and every aching muscle was worth it because I was literally building my dream from the ground up, piece by piece, day by day. The most terrifying and exhilarating moment was signing the lease and realizing there was no turning back. I had officially committed to making this dream a reality. I remember standing in the empty space on that first day, keys trembling in my hand, thinking about all the people who had told me it was too risky, too competitive, too unlikely to succeed. But underneath the fear was this unshakable certainty that this was what I was meant to do, that every challenge I had faced and every doubt I had overcome had prepared me for this moment. I wasn't just opening a boutique. I was proving to myself that I had the courage to bet on my own vision, even when nobody else believed in it. Little did I know that the biggest test of that courage would come not from customers, competitors, or market challenges, but from the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. The dream was real. The business plan was solid. But nothing could have prepared me for the emotional earthquake that was about to shake the foundation of everything I thought I knew about family support. The moment I decided to tell my family about my concrete plans to open the boutique, I should have known from their body language that this wasn't going to go the way I had hoped. We were sitting around the dining table at Sunday dinner, a Porter family tradition that I had faithfully attended every week for years, hoping that consistency would eventually earn me the respect I craved. I had prepared a whole presentation, complete with my business plan printed and bound, photos of the space, and projections showing how the boutique could be profitable within the first year. But before I could even finish explaining my vision, my dad interrupted me with that condescending chuckle that had haunted my childhood and said, "Amelia, sweetheart, you know we love you, but do you really think you're cut out for this? Running a business is serious work. If you've ever had someone dismiss your biggest dream before you even had a chance to explain it, hit that like button and subscribe. Because I want to connect with people who understand what it feels like to have your own family doubt your capabilities before you even get started." My mother's reaction was somehow even worse because it was wrapped in fake concern and presented as maternal wisdom. She leaned forward with that sympathetic smile she used when she thought she was protecting me from myself, and said, "Honey, I just don't want to see you get hurt. The fashion industry is so competitive, and you know how sensitive you are to rejection." She then proceeded to list every small business in our neighborhood that had failed in the past 5 years, as if I hadn't already researched market trends and understood the risks involved. Sarah, who had never shown any interest in fashion or retail, suddenly became an expert on business failure statistics, throwing around numbers about how 80% of new businesses fail within the first year. Jessica joined in with her accounting perspective, questioning every line item in my budget and suggesting that I was being unrealistic about startup costs and revenue projections, despite never having run a business herself. The worst part wasn't their skepticism. It was the way they completely dismissed the years of preparation I had put into this dream. When I showed them my portfolio of designs, my mother glanced at it for maybe 30 seconds before saying, "These are pretty, dear, but pretty doesn't pay the bills." When I explained my market research and target demographic, my father waved it off and said, "You kids and your research. Sometimes you just have to use common sense." Marcus, my brother, barely looked up from his phone during my entire presentation, only engaging long enough to say, "Sounds risky, Amelia. Maybe you should stick with your day job and do this as a hobby on the side." They had already made up their minds about my capabilities before I even opened my mouth, and no amount of preparation or passion was going to change their perception of me as their impractical, dreamy little girl. What hurt the most was realizing that this wasn't just about the boutique. This was a pattern that had been playing out my entire life. Every time I had shared something I was excited about, they had found ways to poke holes in it, to bring me back down to what they considered realistic expectations. When I got accepted into college, they focused on the cost rather than celebrating my achievement. When I landed my first job in retail, they kept asking when I was going to find a real career. When I moved to Los Angeles to pursue better opportunities, they spent months trying to convince me to move back home where it was safe and practical. I had been so conditioned to expect their doubt that I had started doubting myself, second-guessing every decision and seeking their approval for choices that should have been mine alone to make. The dinner ended with them agreeing to think about investing in the boutique, which was their polite way of saying no without having to actually say the word. As I drove home that night, I realized that I had been waiting for their permission to chase my dreams, and they were never going to give it. They were comfortable with me staying small, staying safe, staying in a box that made sense to them, even if that box was slowly suffocating me. That night, I made a decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I was going to open Porter's Paradise, with or without their blessing, with or without their financial support, and with or without their presence at the grand opening. But I had no idea that choosing myself over their approval would cost me so much more than I ever imagined. The real shock wasn't their lack of faith in my business plan. It was discovering how little they actually cared about my happiness when it didn't align with their vision of who I should be. The grand opening night arrived faster than I was ready for, but I had spent weeks preparing every single detail to perfection. I had hired a photographer to capture the moment, ordered custom invitations with gold foil lettering, and even arranged for a local jazz quartet to play background music while guests browsed through my carefully curated collections. The boutique looked like something out of a dream. Soft lighting illuminated the vintage-inspired displays, fresh flowers from the farmer's market filled crystal vases, and champagne glasses sparkled on a table draped with silk. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. My family walking through the door, their faces lighting up with surprise and pride as they realized that their impractical dreamer had actually created something extraordinary. If you've ever put your heart and soul into something only to have the people closest to you treat it like it doesn't matter, drop a comment below and let me know how you handled that heartbreak. As 6 p.m. approached, I kept checking my phone, expecting to see messages from my family asking for directions or letting me know they were running late. Instead, I got radio silence that felt louder than any words could have been. I positioned myself near the entrance, adjusting my dress for the 100th time and practicing my welcome speech, imagining how I would introduce my parents to the other guests and show off the family photos I had displayed near the register. The first customers started arriving, my former co-workers from previous retail jobs, a few neighbors from my apartment building, and even some strangers who had seen my social media posts and decided to check out the new boutique. They were genuinely excited, complimenting the aesthetics, trying on clothes, and asking about my inspiration for different pieces. But with each passing minute, their enthusiasm felt overshadowed by the glaring absence of the people who mattered most to me. By 7 p.m., I had to accept the reality that my family wasn't coming, but I kept making excuses for them in my mind, desperately trying to protect myself from the truth that was becoming more obvious with each passing minute. Maybe my dad had to work late. Maybe my mom got stuck in traffic. Maybe Sarah's babysitter canceled at the last minute. I created elaborate scenarios to explain away their absence because facing the alternative was too painful. I found myself overcompensating with the guests who did show up, being extra animated and enthusiastic, as if their energy could fill the emotional void left by my missing family members. Every time someone asked, "Where's your family?" I had to smile and make up some excuse about them being busy, feeling my heart break a little more each time I had to lie to cover for their indifference. The worst part was pretending that everything was fine when inside I felt like I was slowly crumbling. The final blow came at 8:30 p.m. when my phone buzzed with a group text that felt like a slap across the face. Sarah had sent a casual message to our family chat. "Sorry we couldn't make it tonight, Amelia. Marcus had a thing at work, and Mom and Dad went to dinner with the Hendersons. Maybe we can stop by sometime next week." The casualness of it was what destroyed me. No acknowledgement of how important this night was. No real apology. Just a throwaway excuse that made it clear I ranked somewhere below dinner with family friends and my brother's work obligations. Jessica had simply responded with a thumbs-up emoji, as if that somehow constituted support or acknowledgement of my milestone. I stood there in my beautiful boutique, surrounded by people who were celebrating with me, but feeling more alone than I ever had in my entire life, because the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had chosen to be literally anywhere else. That night, after the last guest left and I was alone with the leftover champagne and untouched hors d'oeuvres, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of their rejection. I wasn't just hurt by their absence. I was devastated by what it represented about how little they valued me, my dreams, and my achievements. This wasn't about being busy or having conflicting schedules. This was about priorities, and I clearly wasn't one of theirs. I sat on the floor of my boutique, still wearing my opening night dress, and cried until I had no tears left, mourning not just the family support I had lost, but the illusion I had been holding on to that they actually cared about my happiness. But sometimes the most painful moments are also the most clarifying ones, and as I locked up that night, I realized that their absence had given me a gift I never expected: the freedom to stop seeking validation from people who were incapable of giving it. What I discovered next about myself and my capacity for resilience would surprise even me, and set the stage for a transformation that would change everything about how I viewed family, success, and my own self-worth. The morning after the grand opening, I woke up feeling like I had been emotionally hit by a truck, but there was also something different stirring inside me, a quiet anger that felt more empowering than destructive. I made coffee in my tiny kitchen and sat looking out at the Los Angeles skyline, really thinking about the pattern of my relationship with my family for the first time without making excuses for their behavior. I had spent my entire adult life contorting myself to fit into their narrow definition of success, changing my plans when they disapproved, and shrinking my dreams to make them feel more comfortable with my choices. The boutique opening had been my attempt to finally prove that I was worthy of their respect, but their absence had shown me that no amount of success would ever be enough if they had already decided I wasn't worth their time. I realized I had been trying to water a dead plant for years, pouring my energy into a relationship that was never going to bloom the way I hoped. For the first time in my life, I started asking myself the hard questions. Why was I so desperate for their approval? Why did their opinion of my choices matter more than my own satisfaction with my life? Why had I given them so much power over my happiness when they had repeatedly shown me that they didn't understand or support who I was becoming? I thought about all the times I had changed my plans to accommodate their expectations, choosing practical electives in college instead of the art classes I wanted, staying in jobs longer than I should have because they were stable, even dating guys they approved of instead of following my own heart. I had been living my life through their lens instead of my own, and the result was a constant feeling of being misunderstood and undervalued by the people who were supposed to know me best. The more I reflected, the more I realized that setting boundaries wasn't about being mean or cutting people off. It was about protecting my own peace and energy so I could focus on building the life I actually wanted. I started thinking about what my life would look like if I stopped seeking their validation and started trusting my own judgment about what was right for me. What if I stopped sharing my victories with people who couldn't celebrate them? What if I stopped asking for advice from people who didn't understand my industry or my goals? What if I started surrounding myself with people who saw my ambition as inspiring instead of impractical? The idea was terrifying and liberating at the same time, because it meant taking full responsibility for my own happiness instead of waiting for someone else to give me permission to be proud of myself. I realized that the boutique's success or failure was going to be entirely up to me now, and that was actually exactly how it should be. I had been so focused on proving myself to my family that I had almost forgotten why I fell in love with fashion in the first place. The joy of helping women feel confident and beautiful, the satisfaction of creating something meaningful with my own hands, the thrill of turning a vision into reality. My grandmother Helen had never needed anyone's permission to be creative, and she had taught me that the most beautiful things in life come from following your own instincts and trusting your own taste. I started to understand that independence wasn't just about financial freedom or living alone. It was about having the courage to define success on your own terms and not allowing other people's fears or limitations to become your own. That day marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, where I decided to be my own biggest cheerleader, instead of waiting for applause from an audience that was never going to give it. I made a promise to myself that I would stop explaining my choices to people who had already made up their minds about who I should be, and start investing that energy in people who actually supported my growth. I was done being the daughter who apologized for dreaming too big, the sister who made herself smaller to make everyone else comfortable, and the woman who needed external validation to feel worthy of success. But learning to set boundaries and trust yourself is easier said than done, especially when you're dealing with people who have known you your whole life and expect you to stay the same forever. What happened next would test my resolve in ways I never anticipated, and teach me the difference between being alone and being lonely. The real transformation was just beginning, and it would require me to redefine not just my relationship with my family, but my entire understanding of what it means to be truly independent and self-assured. The days following my family's no-show were an emotional roller coaster that I wasn't prepared for, and I found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about myself and my motivations. One minute I would be furious, pacing around my apartment and rehearsing all the things I wanted to say to them about their selfishness and lack of support. The next minute I would be drowning in self-doubt, wondering if maybe they were right all along, if maybe I was being unrealistic and naive about the fashion industry. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had about the boutique, analyzing their words for hidden meanings and trying to figure out if there was something I could have done differently to earn their support. If you've ever been stuck in that toxic cycle of anger and self-doubt, after someone you love lets you down, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I want to build a community of people who understand that healing from family disappointment is one of the hardest things we can go through. The worst part was the way I started second-guessing every decision I had made about the boutique, even though deep down, I knew I had done everything right. I would walk through Porter's Paradise during quiet moments, and instead of feeling proud of what I had created, I would hear my mother's voice asking if I was really cut out for this, and my father's condescending chuckle echoing in my mind. I started obsessing over every small detail that wasn't perfect. A slightly crooked picture frame, a dress that hadn't sold yet, a customer who browsed but didn't buy anything, and interpreting these minor imperfections as evidence that my family had been right to doubt me. The beautiful space that had felt like a dream come true just days before suddenly felt like a monument to my own stubbornness and delusion. I was sabotaging my own success by viewing it through the lens of their skepticism, instead of celebrating the incredible achievement it actually was. The inner dialogue became absolutely exhausting, and I found myself having imaginary arguments with my family members at all hours of the day and night. I would be folding clothes or updating inventory and suddenly find myself mentally defending my business plan to my sister Jessica, or explaining to my father why following my passion wasn't the same as being irresponsible. I drafted so many text messages to them, some angry, some pleading, some trying to explain how much their absence had hurt me, but I never sent any of them because I knew that reaching out would just give them another opportunity to minimize my feelings or dismiss my success. The silence between us was deafening, but I was terrified that breaking it would only confirm their belief that I was too emotional and sensitive to handle the real world. I felt trapped between my need to defend myself and my fear of giving them more ammunition to use against me. What made the inner struggle even more complicated was the fact that I genuinely loved them, despite everything they had put me through. These weren't strangers or acquaintances who had disappointed me. These were the people who had raised me, who had been present for my childhood milestones, who I had shared countless memories with over the years. Part of me kept hoping that they would wake up one day and realize what they had done, that they would show up at the boutique with flowers and apologies and finally give me the validation I had been craving my entire life. But another part of me was starting to understand that waiting for them to change was just another form of self-torture, and that I needed to find a way to heal and move forward, regardless of whether they ever acknowledged their mistakes. The battle wasn't just between me and them anymore. It was between the version of myself that needed their approval and the version that was strong enough to succeed without it. I realized that this internal war was actually the real test of my independence, more challenging than any business obstacle I would face. Learning to separate my self-worth from their opinion of me was like rewiring my entire emotional operating system, and it required a level of self-awareness and courage that I wasn't sure I possessed. I had to learn to be proud of my achievements even when the people who mattered most to me couldn't celebrate them, and to trust my own judgment even when their voices of doubt were louder than my inner confidence. The boutique was thriving. Customers were loving the clothes, word of mouth was bringing in new business, and I was actually turning a profit faster than I had projected. But none of that external success mattered if I couldn't silence the critical voices in my head that sounded suspiciously like my family. What I discovered next about the difference between being alone and being lonely would change everything about how I viewed relationships, success, and my own capacity for resilience. The real transformation was about to begin, and it would require me to become the parent, cheerleader, and supporter that I had always wished my family could be. The turning point came about 3 weeks after the grand opening, when I was reorganizing the boutique's display window and noticed a young woman standing outside, just staring at one of my vintage-inspired dresses with this look of pure longing on her face. She stood there for almost 10 minutes, clearly wanting to come in but hesitating for some reason, and I recognized something in her expression that reminded me of myself, that mixture of desire and self-doubt that keeps us from reaching for the things we want most. I walked outside and gently invited her in, and what happened next changed my entire perspective on what it means to find validation and support. Her name was Maya, and she was about my age, working as a teacher but dreaming of updating her wardrobe to reflect the confident woman she was becoming inside. As she tried on clothes and started talking about her own struggles with self-confidence, I realized that I had been so focused on getting approval from my family that I had almost missed the incredible connections I was building with people who actually understood and valued what I was trying to create. Maya's transformation in front of the mirror was like watching someone come alive. And for the first time since opening the boutique, I felt genuinely proud of what I had built without needing anyone else's validation to make that pride feel legitimate. She tried on an emerald green dress that made her eyes sparkle and her whole posture change. And when she looked at herself in the mirror, she whispered, "I feel like the person I've always wanted to be." That moment was worth more than 1,000 family congratulations, because it reminded me why I had fallen in love with fashion in the first place. The power to help someone see their own beauty and potential. I wasn't just selling clothes. I was creating experiences that helped women connect with their most confident selves. Maya bought the dress and 2 other pieces, but more importantly, she left the boutique walking taller and smiling brighter, and I realized that this kind of impact was what real success looked like. That interaction sparked something inside me that had been dormant for weeks. The realization that I had been seeking approval from people who were fundamentally incapable of understanding what I was trying to accomplish. My family saw the boutique as a risky business venture, but my customers saw it as a sanctuary where they could explore their style and feel beautiful. My parents focused on profit margins and failure statistics, but women like Maya focused on how the clothes made them feel and the confidence they gained from finding pieces that truly reflected their personality. I started paying attention to the thank you notes customers left, the way they lit up when they found something perfect, and the stories they shared about how wearing my clothes had changed their day or boosted their confidence for an important meeting or date. This feedback was infinitely more valuable than my family's skepticism, because it came from people who actually understood and appreciated what I was creating. The more I focused on my customers and the community I was building, the less I needed my family's approval to feel successful and fulfilled. I started hosting styling events at the boutique, bringing women together to share fashion tips and support each other's style journeys. And these gatherings became the highlight of my week. Women would come in feeling insecure or uncertain about their look and leave with not just new clothes, but new confidence and friendships with other women who were on similar journeys of self-discovery. I realized that I had been trying to force people who didn't understand my vision to validate it, when I should have been focusing my energy on connecting with people who naturally appreciated what I was offering. The boutique was becoming more than a business. It was becoming a community of women who supported each other's growth and celebrated each other's successes. This shift in focus from seeking external validation to creating genuine value for others completely transformed my relationship with success and failure. Instead of measuring my worth by whether my family was proud of me, I started measuring it by the positive impact I was having on my customers' lives and the growth I was experiencing as a business owner and woman. I began keeping a journal of customer compliments and success stories, not for social media or marketing purposes, but as a reminder during difficult moments that my work mattered and was making a real difference in people's lives. When self-doubt crept in, instead of hearing my father's skeptical voice, I would remember Maya's transformation, or think about the woman who had bought an outfit for her first job interview and later returned to tell me she got the position. I was learning that the most sustainable source of confidence comes from knowing that you're using your talents and passions to contribute something meaningful to the world, regardless of who does or doesn't acknowledge that contribution. But this newfound inner strength was about to be tested in ways I never anticipated, as my success started attracting attention from unexpected places and forcing me to make decisions about forgiveness, boundaries, and what it really means to build a life on your own terms. The process of learning to set boundaries with my family wasn't as simple as deciding to cut them off. It required a much more nuanced approach that took me months to figure out. I started small, like not immediately responding to their texts or calls when I was busy with the boutique, and not sharing every detail of my business progress during our occasional conversations. I stopped seeking their opinions on decisions that were mine to make, like which new brands to carry or whether to expand my operating hours during busy seasons. Most importantly, I learned to change the subject when they tried to offer unsolicited advice about my phase, or suggest that I should have a backup plan in case the boutique failed. Setting these small boundaries felt uncomfortable at first because I had been conditioned to seek their input on everything. But each time I trusted my own judgment instead of deferring to their skepticism, I felt a little stronger and more confident in my own abilities. The biggest boundary I had to set was emotional, learning not to internalize their lack of enthusiasm or support as a reflection of my own worth or the value of my work. When my mom would make passive-aggressive comments about hoping I knew what I was doing, or my dad would ask if I was still playing store, I had to consciously choose not to let their words trigger the old patterns of self-doubt and overcompensation. I developed a mental mantra that I would repeat to myself: their inability to see my success doesn't diminish my success. I started viewing their skepticism as information about them, their fears, their limited perspective, their discomfort with risk, rather than as truth about me or my capabilities. This shift in perspective was incredibly liberating because it allowed me to feel compassion for their limitations without allowing those limitations to become my own. I also had to set boundaries around what I was willing to discuss and share with them about my life and business. Instead of trying to convince them that the boutique was successful by sharing sales figures or customer testimonials, I simply stopped offering that information unless they specifically asked, which they rarely did. I learned to respond to their questions about the business with brief, polite answers that didn't invite further criticism or unsolicited advice. When they asked how things were going, I would say, "Everything's going well. Thanks for asking," and then change the subject to something neutral like the weather or what they were watching on TV. This approach protected my energy and prevented me from falling into the old trap of trying to prove myself to people who had already decided not to be impressed by anything I accomplished. The peace that came from these boundaries was unlike anything I had ever experienced. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't walking on eggshells or constantly bracing myself for criticism and disappointment. I could focus entirely on running my business, serving my customers, and building the life I actually wanted instead of exhausting myself trying to manage other people's expectations and reactions. The boutique started thriving even more once I stopped second-guessing every decision through the lens of what my family might think, and I began making choices based purely on what was best for my business and my customers. I slept better, smiled more, and felt genuinely excited about my future instead of constantly anxious about whether I was living up to someone else's standards of success and respectability. Setting boundaries also taught me the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had been so afraid of my family's disapproval that I hadn't realized how isolating it was to constantly seek validation from people who were fundamentally unable to give it. Once I stopped chasing their approval, I had more energy to invest in relationships with people who actually supported my goals and celebrated my successes. The boutique customers who became friends, the other small business owners in my neighborhood who understood the challenges I was facing, the women who attended my styling events and cheered each other on, these relationships filled my life with genuine connection and support in a way that my family's conditional love never had. I realized that the family I had been born into didn't have to be the only family I ever had, and that sometimes the people who choose to support you are more valuable than the people who are obligated to love you, but don't know how to show it. But just when I had found my peace and established my boundaries, something unexpected happened that would test everything I had learned about independence, forgiveness, and staying true to myself when faced with temptation to return to old patterns. 6 months after opening Porter's Paradise, the boutique had not only survived but was thriving beyond my wildest projections, and I was finally experiencing the sweet satisfaction of watching my vision come to life exactly as I had imagined it. Sales were consistently strong. I had developed relationships with several up-and-coming designers who were excited to have their pieces featured in my curated collections, and word-of-mouth referrals were bringing in new customers almost daily. The styling events had become so popular that I had to start limiting attendance and creating a wait list, and I was being asked to participate in local fashion shows and pop-up markets around Los Angeles. Most importantly, I was making enough profit not just to cover my expenses and pay myself a decent salary, but to start planning expansions and improvements that would take the boutique to the next level. If you're someone who's ever doubted your own abilities or had people tell you your dreams were unrealistic, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that like button, because I want to share this journey with people who understand that sometimes proving the doubters wrong is the sweetest victory of all. The growth wasn't just financial, it was deeply personal and professional in ways I hadn't anticipated when I first opened the doors. I had evolved from someone who second-guessed every decision to a confident business owner who trusted her instincts and wasn't afraid to take calculated risks. When a larger space became available 2 doors down from my original location, I didn't spend weeks agonizing over the decision or seeking opinions from people who didn't understand my industry. I evaluated the opportunity, ran the numbers, and made the choice to expand within 3 days. When fashion bloggers and local influencers started reaching out for collaborations, I negotiated partnerships that aligned with my brand values instead of desperately accepting every offer out of fear that I might not get another chance. I was finally operating from a place of confidence and abundance instead of fear and scarcity. The customer base had grown into a genuine community of women who not only shopped at Porter's Paradise, but actively promoted the boutique to their friends and colleagues. I had customers who would bring their sisters, mothers, and girlfriends in for group shopping sessions, turning the boutique into a social hub where women connected over fashion and supported each other's style journeys. Maya, the teacher who had been my turning point customer, had become a regular who brought in new people almost monthly and had even started helping me host the styling events as a volunteer. The reviews on Google and Yelp were overwhelmingly positive, with customers consistently mentioning not just the quality of the clothes, but the experience of shopping somewhere that made them feel seen, understood, and celebrated. I realized I had created exactly what I had set out to build, a space where women could discover their personal style and feel confident in their own skin. The success was attracting attention from unexpected places. Fashion magazines were featuring the boutique in their local gems sections. Other small business owners were reaching out for advice on starting their own ventures, and I was even being invited to speak on panels about entrepreneurship and following your passion. A local television station had done a feature story on the boutique during Small Business Week, and the segment had brought in customers from all over the city who had been inspired by my story of starting a business, despite having no formal business training or family support. I was becoming known not just as a boutique owner, but as an example of what was possible when someone had the courage to bet on themselves and their vision, regardless of who believed in them or supported them along the way. But perhaps the most meaningful measure of success was how different I felt in my own life. I woke up excited to go to work. I felt proud to tell people what I did for a living, and I had a sense of purpose and fulfillment that I had never experienced in any of my previous jobs. The boutique had become an extension of myself, a physical manifestation of my creativity, business acumen, and ability to connect with other women in meaningful ways. I was finally living authentically, making decisions based on my own values and goals instead of trying to please people who would never be satisfied with my choices anyway. The scared, insecure woman who had stood alone in an empty boutique 6 months earlier had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, confident, successful, and genuinely happy with the life she had created for herself. But just when I thought I had found my groove and established my independence, my family's silence was about to be broken in a way that would force me to decide whether success had changed me enough to forgive their absence, or whether some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. The real test of my transformation was just around the corner, and it would challenge everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and what it truly means to succeed on your own terms. The sweet taste of success became even sweeter when I realized that my triumph wasn't just personal. It was visible, undeniable, and happening right in the heart of Los Angeles where anyone could witness it. Porter's Paradise had become the kind of boutique that people talked about, recommended to their friends, and featured in their social media posts, and I was living proof that following your passion could lead to both financial success and deep personal fulfillment. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same family who had dismissed my impractical dream was now watching from afar as their unrealistic daughter built something remarkable without their help or approval. I wasn't seeking revenge in a petty or vindictive way. I was simply living my best life and letting my success speak for itself. Have you ever experienced that moment when your success becomes so obvious that the people who doubted you can't ignore it anymore, even if they refuse to acknowledge it directly? The recognition was coming from all directions now, and it felt like the universe was finally acknowledging all the hard work, sleepless nights, and emotional battles I had fought to get to this point. Fashion Week LA had invited me to participate in their emerging designer showcase, where Porter's Paradise would have a booth alongside established boutiques and major brands. A prominent fashion blogger with over 100,000 followers had featured my boutique in her Hidden Gems of LA series, calling it a breath of fresh air in the oversaturated fashion landscape, and praising my ability to curate pieces that made every woman feel like the best version of herself. Local newspapers were writing articles about the boutique boom in my neighborhood, and Porter's Paradise was consistently mentioned as one of the driving forces behind the area's growing reputation as a fashion destination. The validation was incredible, but what felt even better was knowing that I had earned every bit of recognition through my own vision, determination, and refusal to give up when things got difficult. The financial success was beyond anything I had projected in my original business plan, and I was finally able to pay myself a salary that reflected the value I was creating while also reinvesting in the boutique's growth and expansion. I had hired 2 part-time employees, Emma, a recent fashion school graduate who brought fresh ideas and social media expertise, and Rachel, a former department store manager who understood the business side of retail and helped me streamline operations. The boutique was generating enough revenue to support 3 people's livelihoods, while also building a substantial emergency fund and planning for future growth opportunities. I was even able to start a small scholarship fund for young women who wanted to pursue fashion careers but couldn't afford design school, turning my success into a way to help others achieve their own dreams. The scared woman who had stood alone at her grand opening was now a successful business owner who was creating opportunities for other people while building the life she had always wanted. But the most satisfying aspect of the boutique's prosperity was how it had validated every instinct I had trusted and every risk I had taken despite my family's skepticism. The location they had called too expensive was now prime real estate that I owned free and clear, with a waiting list of businesses wanting to rent space in the same building. The target demographic they had dismissed as too niche was not only supporting my boutique, but actively promoting it to their networks, creating a word-of-mouth marketing engine that no amount of advertising could have bought. The impractical degree in fashion design that they had discouraged me from pursuing was now the foundation of a thriving business that combined my creative passion with solid business principles. Every decision they had questioned had turned out to be exactly right, and I was finally experiencing the deep satisfaction that comes from trusting your own judgment and watching it pay off in spectacular fashion. The success wasn't just changing my bank account. It was changing how I saw myself and how others saw me, and that transformation was the most valuable revenge of all. I was no longer the family dreamer who needed to be brought back down to earth. I was a successful entrepreneur who had proven that dreams backed by hard work and determination could become reality. Strangers were asking for my advice on starting their own businesses. Fashion students were requesting internships, and other boutique owners were inviting me to collaborate on events and promotions. I had earned respect in my industry and my community through my own efforts. And that respect felt infinitely more valuable than the approval I had once desperately sought from people who had never understood my vision in the first place. But success has a funny way of changing not just how you see yourself, but how others see you too. And I was about to discover that my family's indifference was beginning to crack as they watched their impractical daughter build something they couldn't ignore. The real test of my newfound confidence and boundaries was just beginning, and it would force me to decide whether forgiveness was weakness or strength, and whether family ties were worth preserving when they had been broken by years of doubt and dismissal. The first crack in my family's wall of indifference came exactly 8 months after the grand opening, in the form of a text message from my sister Sarah that was so casual it almost seemed accidental. She had sent a screenshot of a social media post that featured Porter's Paradise in a Best Boutiques in LA roundup with the message, "Saw this and thought of you. Looks like you're doing well." The tone was friendly but cautious, as if she was testing the waters to see how I would respond after months of minimal contact and zero acknowledgement of my success. What struck me most was that she had clearly been following my progress from a distance, seeing the media coverage and online buzz, but choosing not to engage until it became impossible to ignore how well I was doing. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions: vindication that she could no longer deny my success, hurt that it had taken external validation for her to reach out, and wariness about what her sudden interest really meant. My mother's approach was more direct, but equally transparent in its motivation. She called me on a Thursday afternoon when she knew I'd be at the boutique, and spent the first few minutes asking general questions about my health and apartment, before casually mentioning that she had heard through the grapevine that my business was doing really well. She didn't mention the grapevine was probably Google, where a simple search of my name now brought up multiple articles and features about Porter's Paradise and my success as a young entrepreneur. "I always knew you had it in you," she said, which was such a blatant rewriting of history that I almost laughed out loud, remembering her exact words about fashion being pretty, but not paying the bills. She then launched into a story about how she had always been supportive of my dreams, conveniently forgetting the months of skepticism, discouragement, and the grand opening she had skipped to have dinner with family friends. The conversation felt surreal, like she was trying to insert herself into a success story she had actively tried to discourage. The most telling sign of their shifting attitude came when my brother Marcus started liking my business Instagram posts and sharing them to his own social media accounts, something he had never done before, despite having access to my content for months. Suddenly, the brother who had barely looked up from his phone during my business presentation was proudly telling his followers about his entrepreneur sister and her amazing boutique in LA. My father, who had been the most skeptical of all, started making casual references to Amelia's shop in conversations with his friends, as if he had been a supportive parent all along, instead of the man who had chuckled at my business plan and suggested I learn my lessons the hard way. The transformation was so obvious and self-serving that it would have been laughable if it wasn't so emotionally complicated for me to navigate. What made their sudden interest even more frustrating was how they seemed to expect me to forget their previous behavior and welcome them back into my life as if nothing had happened. Sarah started asking if she could visit the boutique the next time she was in LA. My mother began offering unsolicited advice about expanding to other cities, and Marcus suggested that maybe I could give his girlfriend a discount on some clothes. They were all trying to position themselves as supportive family members who deserved to benefit from my success, without ever acknowledging the pain their absence and skepticism had caused, or apologizing for missing the most important milestone in my career. It was as if they believed that success should automatically erase hurt feelings, and that I should be grateful for their newfound attention, regardless of how conditional and opportunistic it clearly was. The most challenging part of their change in attitude was that it forced me to confront my own feelings about forgiveness, family loyalty, and what I actually wanted from these relationships moving forward. Part of me felt victorious that they could no longer deny or dismiss what I had accomplished, but another part of me felt sad that it had taken external validation for them to see my worth. I had worked so hard to build a life where their approval didn't matter, but their sudden interest was stirring up old wounds and complicated emotions that I thought I had moved past. I found myself questioning whether I should be gracious and welcoming, maintaining the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish, or something in between that protected my peace while leaving the door open for genuine healing. The success I had achieved was supposed to be the end of the story, but instead it was becoming the beginning of an even more complex chapter about forgiveness, family dynamics, and whether some relationships can be repaired after trust has been broken. Their attempts to reconnect would soon escalate beyond casual texts and phone calls, forcing me to make decisions about my future that would test everything I had learned about self-worth, boundaries, and what it really means to succeed on your own terms. The most profound realization came to me on a quiet Sunday evening as I sat in Porter's Paradise after closing, surrounded by everything I had built with my own hands and determination, finally understanding that the journey had been about so much more than proving my family wrong or building a successful business. I was looking at the wall where I had hung photos of customers wearing pieces from the boutique, Maya in her emerald dress at her promotion celebration, Rachel in the vintage blazer she wore to her first job interview, countless women who had found confidence and joy in the space I had created. These photos represented the real victory, the impact that extended far beyond profit margins or social media followers, and I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeking external validation and started finding genuine fulfillment in the work itself. If you're on your own journey of building something meaningful despite the doubters, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I want to connect with people who understand that the most important victories are often the ones that happen inside us, not the ones that everyone else can see. The success of Porter's Paradise had taught me that there's a fundamental difference between achieving something to prove other people wrong and achieving something because it aligns with your authentic self and values. In the beginning, I had been motivated largely by a desire to show my family that they had underestimated me, to force them to acknowledge that I was capable of more than they had believed. But as the months passed and the boutique flourished, I discovered that the most satisfying moments had nothing to do with their opinions or recognition. They were the quiet moments when a customer found the perfect outfit for a special occasion, the conversations with other women entrepreneurs who were building their own dreams, the satisfaction of solving problems and making decisions based on my own expertise and intuition. The external markers of success were wonderful, but the internal transformation was what had truly changed my life in ways I never could have anticipated when I first turned that key in the boutique door. I started thinking about what success actually meant to me now, versus what I had thought it meant when I was desperately seeking my family's approval and validation. Success wasn't just about proving that I could run a profitable business, or getting recognition from fashion magazines and influencers, though those achievements were certainly meaningful and hard-earned. Real success was waking up every day excited about the work I was doing, knowing that my talents and passions were being used to create something valuable for other people, and feeling aligned with my choices instead of constantly second-guessing myself or worrying about other people's reactions. It was the freedom to make decisions based on my own values and vision, the confidence to trust my instincts even when they went against conventional wisdom, and the peace that came from no longer needing anyone else's permission to be proud of my accomplishments and the life I was building. The reflection also made me realize how much I had grown as a person through this entire experience, not just as a business owner, but as someone who understood her own worth and wasn't willing to compromise it for relationships that required me to be smaller or less ambitious. The scared, insecure woman who had stood alone at her grand opening had been replaced by someone who could handle criticism, navigate challenges, make tough decisions, and maintain her sense of self, even when people she loved couldn't or wouldn't support her journey. I had learned to be my own cheerleader, my own advisor, and my own source of validation, which meant that other people's opinions and reactions had become interesting information rather than determining factors in my happiness and self-worth. The boutique had been successful beyond my wildest dreams, but the personal growth had been even more valuable because it was something no one could take away from me, regardless of what happened with the business or my family relationships in the future. Most importantly, I understood now that the people who truly mattered in my life were the ones who had supported me when I was struggling and uncertain, not the ones who only showed interest after my success became undeniable and beneficial to them. The customers who had become friends, the other business owners who had offered advice and encouragement, the women who attended my styling events and created a community of mutual support. These relationships were based on genuine connection and shared values rather than obligation or convenience. My family's conditional love and fair-weather support had taught me to recognize and appreciate authentic relationships, and I was grateful for the lesson, even though it had been painful to learn. The boutique had given me financial independence and professional fulfillment, but it had also shown me what it felt like to be truly valued and supported by people who understood and celebrated who I was becoming, rather than trying to keep me who I had always been. What happened next would test whether I could maintain this hard-won perspective when faced with the temptation to return to old patterns, and whether forgiveness was something I owed to people who had never actually apologized for the pain they had caused. Looking back on the entire journey from that devastating grand opening night to becoming a successful entrepreneur who had built something meaningful and lasting, I realized that independence isn't just about financial freedom or living alone. It's about having the courage to define success on your own terms and the strength to pursue your vision, even when the people closest to you can't see its value. The boutique had become more than a business. It was proof that I could trust my own judgment, overcome setbacks and disappointments, and create something beautiful and impactful without needing anyone else's permission or approval. I had learned that the most powerful form of revenge isn't plotting against people who have hurt you. It's building a life so fulfilling and authentic that their opinions become irrelevant to your happiness and peace of mind. True independence means being so secure in your own worth and capabilities that other people's doubt can't shake your foundation or derail your progress toward your goals. The transformation had been about much more than proving my family wrong or achieving external markers of success, though those victories had certainly been satisfying after years of being dismissed and underestimated. The real change had happened inside me, in the way I made decisions, handled criticism, celebrated achievements, and related to other people in both personal and professional contexts. I had evolved from someone who sought validation from people who were fundamentally unable to give it, to someone who could recognize and appreciate genuine support while maintaining healthy boundaries with those who couldn't or wouldn't offer it. The scared, insecure woman who had once apologized for dreaming too big had been replaced by a confident entrepreneur who understood that her ambitions were assets, not liabilities, and that the right people would be inspired by her success rather than threatened by it. The boutique's success had shown me that when you align your work with your authentic passions and values, you don't just build a business, you create a platform for impact that extends far beyond profit margins and personal achievement. Porter's Paradise had become a community hub where women connected with their confidence, discovered their personal style, and supported each other's journeys of self-expression and growth. The styling events, customer relationships, and collaborative partnerships I had developed were proof that success could be both personally fulfilling and socially meaningful, creating value for other people while building the life I had always wanted for myself. I wasn't just selling clothes, I was helping women feel beautiful, confident, and authentic in their own skin, which gave my work a sense of purpose that no amount of family approval could have provided. Perhaps most importantly, I had learned that you don't need everyone to believe in your dreams for them to come true. You just need to believe in them yourself and be willing to do the work required to make them reality. The people who are meant to be part of your success story will show up when you need them, while those who can't support your growth will reveal themselves through their absence or conditional love. My family's reaction to my success had taught me valuable lessons about forgiveness, boundaries, and the difference between people who love you as you are and people who love the version of you that makes them comfortable. I could appreciate the role they had played in my development without giving them power over my future choices or allowing their limitations to become my own. The story of Porter's Paradise wasn't just about opening a boutique or building a profitable business. It was about discovering what was possible when someone had the courage to bet on themselves despite criticism, doubt, and lack of support from the people who were supposed to be their biggest cheerleaders. Every woman who walked through my doors and left feeling more confident, every styling event that brought strangers together as friends, every day I woke up excited about the work I was doing. These were the real measures of success that no one could diminish or take away from me. I had learned that the most beautiful revenge is a life well lived, and that true independence comes not from proving others wrong, but from building something so aligned with your authentic self that their opinions become background noise to the symphony of your own fulfillment. The boutique had given me financial freedom, but more importantly, it had given me the unshakable knowledge that I could trust myself to create the life I wanted, regardless of who did or didn't support that vision along the way. As I stand here today in Porter's Paradise, surrounded by the beautiful life I built from scratch despite every obstacle and discouragement, I want you to know that your dreams are valid, regardless of who believes in them or supports them along the way. If my story has resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed by the people who were supposed to champion your success, I want you to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because I'm building a community of dreamers who refuse to let other people's limitations become their own reality. Your journey might look different from mine, but the principles are the same. Trust your instincts, do the work, and don't wait for permission to pursue the life you actually want. I want to walk alongside you as you discover what's possible when you stop seeking validation from people who can't see your vision and start building something that reflects your authentic self and values. The most important thing I learned through this entire experience is that you have everything inside you right now to start creating the life you want, even if you can't see the complete path from where you're standing today. My boutique started as a dream in my grandmother's sewing room, grew through years of preparation and sacrifice, and became reality because I was willing to take the first step even when I couldn't see the staircase. Your first step might be researching your industry, saving money for your goal, taking a class to develop your skills, or simply making the decision to stop apologizing for your ambitions and start treating them as legitimate pursuits worthy of your time and energy. The people who are meant to support your journey will show up when you need them, but you can't wait for their arrival to begin building the foundation of your success. Every day you postpone your dreams is a day you're choosing their fears and limitations over your own potential and possibilities. I want you to think about what success would look like for you if you removed everyone else's opinions and expectations from the equation. What would you build, create, or pursue if you only had to answer to yourself and the people you're meant to serve through your work? Maybe it's starting a business like I did. Maybe it's changing careers, going back to school, moving to a new city, or finally pursuing that creative project you've been putting off until someday. Whatever it is, I want you to know that you don't need perfect circumstances, unlimited resources, or universal approval to begin. You just need the courage to take the first step and the commitment to keep going when things get difficult or when people around you don't understand your vision. The boutique taught me that the most fulfilling success comes from aligning your work with your authentic passions and using your talents to create value for other people, regardless of whether your family or friends can see the wisdom in your choices. But here's what I really want you to understand. This story isn't over, and neither is yours. The success of Porter's Paradise was just the beginning of a journey that continues to unfold in unexpected ways, and I've learned that each achievement opens doors to new challenges, opportunities, and questions about what it means to live authentically and build something meaningful in this world. My family's reaction to my success, the decisions I made about forgiveness and boundaries, and the way I navigated their attempts to reconnect after years of dismissal, all of these experiences taught me lessons about relationships, self-worth, and the difference between conditional and unconditional love that I never could have learned any other way. Next week, I'm going to share what happened when my family finally tried to make amends, and how I decided whether their newfound interest in my success was genuine or just another form of conditional acceptance. The journey of building Porter's Paradise changed me in ways I never anticipated, but it also raised questions about family, forgiveness, and what we owe to people who didn't believe in us when it mattered most. If you want to hear about the confrontations, conversations, and decisions that followed my success, make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on, because the next video will reveal how I handled my family's attempts to rewrite history and claim credit for a success they had actively tried to discourage. Your story is still being written, your dreams are still valid, and your potential is still unlimited regardless of who has supported you or dismissed you in the past. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, keep building the life you actually want instead of the one other people think you should have, because the world needs what you have to offer, even if not everyone can see it yet.